So Joey went down to San Antonio and did a little interview with Ernesto, specifically about a car that he's painted. Are you going to talk about your car, the car today? Okay, so I won't spoil anything, but the video was very inspiring with the artwork and the characters involved. And I texted Joey and I was like, now that's Latino futurism. And he was like, yep, it certainly is. So I took it upon myself to see if Ernesto could join us today, and I was so pleasantly surprised that he said yes. You almost acted like you wanted to be here, and don't tell anybody. So this is a community expansion, in my opinion, because we're trying to show with the conference that the community has fewer boundaries than you might think, and has more things to include than you might think. And so I'm just super thrilled that we're able to have Ernesto with us today, not only because he's a badass, but because he's got some excellent things to contribute. And I think the examples that come through in his artwork are almost perfectly parallel to what the first panel was talking about, and very community is supportive, which to me is hyper important in this Afrofuturist and Latino futurist conversations. And now I'll shut up and hand it back and let Ernesto take over.
Okay, Ernesto, can we hear him? Let's just get a sound check. Okay,
I just turned on my mic. Can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Sorry you can't see us, but I assure you there are many of us here and we're quite excited. So imagine our excited faces.
I can see you, sir.
Yeah, okay.
Well, first of all, I absolutely want to name that I am thankful and honored and appreciative of being invited to participate. I think this collaboration and working in solidarity with Black communities has been super important for me throughout my history for many, many reasons. I just want to say thank you. I want to name it and say thank you. I do think there's some parallels and some inspiration and some motivation. You know, I have been in lots of spaces with lots of people in solidarity, and so this feels like that, and I just want to say thank you. So, that being said, I'm going to take a little bit of time to share the car, yes, but I think the car that Joey came down to photograph and talk about is really a culmination of a much longer trajectory of production and conceptualization. And so this presentation is going to be rooted in my background as the son of migrant farm workers. I grew up in the fields. I'm old enough to where migrant labor still looked and felt the way it did in those old-timey pictures of, you know, farm workers beaten down by sun and rain and cold and all that stuff. And I grew up in that space, and it heavily informs the work that I do as a visual artist, but also the work that I do as an educator and what I try to do as a community worker. So let me just get into the presentation. I'm going to share my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see it. Okay, great. And we should just be in PowerPoint. Do you see just the PowerPoint at this point?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm going to talk about agricultural epistemology and interspatial navigation. That's a fancy way for me to say that I am going to talk about my history and lived experience and knowledge production as a farm worker. I'm going to tell you my origin story and some of the origin stories of my characters that I work into multiple mediums, right? I work as a painter. I studied painting in college. And I moved into 3D animation, graphic design, illustration, And I don't do the 3D work anymore, but I do work heavily as an illustrator, and so these characters kind of exist in both mediums. Um, just to like frame the conversation a little bit, I want to talk about navigation. Right, so having come from the fields and moved through different academic and educational experiences, I eventually ended up at an Ivy League university. So this idea of moving from fields to the institutions is a very real and internalized process for me. Thinking about spirituality and thinking about both terrain and earth and land, and as it relates to spiritual consciousness and awareness, and moving through spaces. The idea of code switching, and the word spatial intelligence is there. It's really learning how to be strategic in environments of survival, right? And then really learning that mobility, and then now as an educator, understanding how you can contribute to your community by sharing that strategy and sharing that process of mobility with the young people or community members that you're working with. And we'll talk about all of that through these pictures. So I'm going to start by sharing just images of my childhood. This is a picture of my father and I. The image is us sitting in the back of a truck in an orange grove. That truck actually was the truck that we migrated in. You'll see it in a few pictures, and it becomes central to a lot of my background and my origin. We would travel from Texas to the Midwest, Michigan, Ohio, Kentucky, and then we would move down to Central Florida, and we'd come back to the valley in Texas. And that was our triangle, our migration triangle, right? But this was my father and myself as a baby. So when I say that I grew up in the fields or in the back of this pickup truck, I quite literally, that's where I would grow up. That's the same truck in the background. You see a picture of myself and my mom. So the truck would sometimes have that camper on the back, sometimes not. It was usually when we were migrating that they would put it there just as protection. There were times that I would ride the highways and interstates in the back of that truck while my parents were driving. They would create this makeshift bed, stack all of our, across the top rails, right? And then they would stack all of our belongings or whatever underneath, and then the top would be where I would lay and watch. It was really interesting because I would watch the highways and watch cars and watch trees and landscapes and cityscapes and bridges. And so this idea of observing became really important in the back of that vehicle. Here's a picture of one of the homes that we worked in. So there was this, in this migrant space, the farmers where you work are supposed to provide some form of housing in the environment. At least that was the case at that time. It did not have to meet particular standards, I don't think, because this is the type of space we usually had when we would migrate from one farm to another. That figure is really important. You'll see that image again, both on canvas and illustration work, as well as the car at the end of the presentation. The picture of myself and one of my cousins playing in the dirt. This was childhood. Again, I'm just giving you these, right? As a storyteller, I can talk a lot because I've been kind of trained to talk a lot, but the images tell a story. That same vehicle changed colors, and here I am growing up, learning how to take care of the vehicle. I grew up with this love of cars because of this truck. So this is me in two different spaces. One is in front of a strawberry field. The other is in a chicken farm. So the farm where we eventually settled was that it was a chicken farm on one side, and it was strawberry fields or whatever crops we were growing on the other side. So the idea of chickens and animals became very important, and they'll continue to be important throughout the work. Again, this is my childhood, the fields, right? Dirt, earth. And then I end up in this space. And I think it's super important. I ended up at Dartmouth College in Hanover, New Hampshire. And when I go back and forth between this image and this image, I think it really highlights the contrast of experience, right? Now, there was a whole lot that had to happen in between there, and it included having to learn code, having to learn how to observe, how to reflect, how to intuit, and then how to navigate every environment I went into, whether it was an after school program or it was my actual classroom settings. I started off in public school. I ended up getting a scholarship to a private high school. That in and of itself was a major transition and navigation point that forced me to really learn strategically how to be, how to exist. And so while I was at Dartmouth is when I started really thinking about and learning about how to express this experience. And I studied studio art. I majored in studio art when I was there, and it was great, right? Because we were having philosophical conversations, and I got to watch amazing debates and presentations. I remember, for any of you who know Dinesh D'Souza, who was a hyper right-wing writer, commentator, he debated my philosophy professor, who was Roger Masters at the time. So literally, as a young kid who had come from the fields and come from this public school education, then had a little taste of like elitism in this private school space, I come up to Dartmouth, and within the first month or two, I get to watch, I get to observe and listen to this debate between these two thinkers. One who I heavily disagreed with, and one who was just really speaking to my soul. And so it was powerful because Dartmouth showed me that as traumatic as it was going to be, and it was, I was presented the first day with a challenge. The first day on my campus, I was told that I didn't belong there, that I was there on financial aid, and that this student who challenged me said, "My father pays your tuition. It's my privilege to be here. It's not your right. You don't belong here." That literally was day one at Dartmouth, and it ended up contextualizing the entire 4-year experience. But so did that debate between Dinesh D'Souza and Roger Masters, because I got to see the complexity of like intellectualism, the capacity for people to stand up and speak. And I started understanding that I belonged in this space, and that I could also use my voice in this space. And then the visual arts training just kept building the capacity to express that, right? So this was actually an image that I created in my senior year at Dartmouth, and it was about the organic versus the inorganic. So inorganic versus organic, right? And I layered these images of buildings and architectural structures on top of humans and plants and indigenous identity. And so I was learning, again, through the complexity of the dialogues and conversations and arguments and debates that I experienced in this elitist institution. I was learning how to discuss it through my visual art. So now I want to talk about how that developed into the characters that you see today. All right, so shortly after Dartmouth, I started creating images that represented a strong Chicano identity. So this image contains the eagle warrior, right, in the foreground. It contains a farmer, plant life, and this kind of powerful woman holding a Unite sign in the background. And in the far background, we see what looks like an Aztec pyramid or some sort of indigenous pyramid, kind of merging with a metro cityscape. And so for me, this becomes part of the dialogue, right? Then informed by that art piece that I created in college. The organic versus the inorganic. The tension that exists there, the conflict that exists there, the celebrations that exist there, but that it becomes constantly metaphoric for me of what I'm going through as a person. I start thinking about the farm worker as someone who's been hidden for so long, and who is now starting to, in the midst of chaos and hate speech and public sentiment that's against the presence of farm workers and immigrants, I start thinking about our communities coming out of darkness, coming out of the underground and coming into spaces of owning power and voice. So here you see this family of farm workers climbing a ladder out of the underground. But then the underground is interesting, right? Because the underground is filled with, there's a skull, there's an eagle warrior, there looks like a group of human figures holding protest signs. So like, it's filled with spirituality, it's filled with symbolism of battle and kind of ancestry. And so it's almost the power of community to step into space, right? Again, we're thinking about navigation. Personally, I start to think about myself as a campesino and the child of campesinos, and I'm surrounded by all these popular images, right? Pop culture images that are super influential, right? You think about superheroes and all that stuff, and I start to think about this superhero / anti-hero called Campesino Man. And this is one of the first iterations of Campesino Man where I'm like thinking about my navigation. And so what was it like? What did it mean to navigate? And it was hard. And how did I get, like, what propelled me through the navigation process and the trauma that existed in it? And I developed this little character called Campesino Man that has a jetpack. And that jetpack isn't just, the superpower to fly, but it became that. It became the embodiment of my navigation. And then I started to understand that it's not just my navigation, but that our communities are constantly navigating, right? As a migrant worker, as a non-migrant, like people who don't migrate are still having to learn how to navigate spaces from childhood through adulthood and into, right, our life as elders. The figures at the top were me starting to think about what was my relationship to, you see a bull on one side and a chicken on the other. The bull's interesting, I'm gonna talk about that real quick. So when I was 3, 4, 5 years old and we lived on one of the farms, we had a bull that lived behind our trailer, and that bull was named Amos. And so Amos the bull was this big, giant Brahma bull, and I was terrified of this bull when I was really little, but not for long. There was a point when the farmer that owned the space invited me into the corral to meet Amos, and Amos he came up to me, allowed me to pet him, and then this bull became my friend. So now picture this giant, massive creature who was initially a symbol of fear and and kind of terror for me as a tiny child, to then see this creature as a friend and as a companion in this farm space. And there were many times that I would be outside playing in the yard, that I would just walk up to the corral fence and Amos would come up and just let me pet him. So there was this thing around me playing in the chicken farms, right? Going through the aisles where the rows of chickens existed, and they were laying eggs, and there were piles of manure underneath them, and that's the space that I would play in. And then I would go over to the corral, and I would see this giant Brahma bull and befriend him. And I believe that all of those spaces contributed somehow to my capacity to navigate. So then it translates to Campesino Man, this kind of internal capacity to move and to kind of overcome fear and become aware of allies, become aware of resources, become aware of friendships and relationships, become aware of conflict and antagonism, and learn how to kind of stay away from that. Here you have an image of myself as a baby in the arms of my father. And again, thinking now about the spiritual experience of a parent having to raise a child in this migrant space. Around the father, you have community. You have these figures of farmers and women, but above them you have these angel figures, and they're one of the first representations of a character I call El Cholo Cherub. Now the Cholo Cherub is that. It is a cherub character dressed or carrying the uniform of the Cholo, a kind of Chicano aesthetic. And so it's interesting because the Cholo Cherub was me thinking about, right, there's these angelic figures that exist in Renaissance art, but they matter to me. And they matter to me as a young Chicano, and I would love to see them represented as someone that I can identify with. But then I put the bandana over the Cholo's eyes in a way that the eyes are concealed, so it kind of obstructs vision. However, the Cholo Cherub also represents a deeper consciousness and awareness, so this capacity to see beyond the surface and the superficial and look spiritually, look intuitively, right? So that's the Cholo Cherub. You'll see him. I also want to identify the strawberry skirt on this character. And it's me playing a little bit with gender. The figure is kind of framed by these corn stalks and this light, very much in this way that the Virgen de Guadalupe might be presented, right? With the central figure and this aura or light around her. And I did this with the image of my father because there was a point where my mother went back to school. And when she went back to school, we were still in the fields. She went back to get an undergraduate degree. They had both graduated high school, but my mother had dreamt of going on to college. So she went back to school, and my father took on a lot of the home caretaker, caregiver roles when she was in that process. So there was this space where my mom and my father were really like playing with traditional gender roles and norms. I don't know that they were even conscious of it, but they were kind of working against and pushing back against those norms. So you remember the image of myself in front of an old trailer and the field in the background. I eventually took that image and turned it into this character, and I think that's where the Cholo Cherub may have like really gained its figurative representation, in that baby, maybe me, but also other babies, represent so much as far as like potential and future, that I started to understand them as a central figure in consciousness and awareness. And so then I started showing that figure as there's this transition of like the grounded physical experience of a child on earth to the spiritual conscious celestial experience of the soul and the presence as like this guide of consciousness and awareness. So I painted him here, drinking his bottle. There's a door in the background. These are actually painted on two doors side by side. It's done with aerosol paint. And the door, for me, represents this idea of opportunity and transition. And in the sky, you'll start to see these strawberries. Now, I start to play with the strawberry moving from the earth into the sky as heavenly like bodies, right? They take over the idea of it's stars in some of my more space-like landscapes or spacescapes, right? And then I start to really think about this lived experience transitioning into this celestial experience, right? So now the Cholo Cherub's kind of being born here. He's growing this plant. And so you'll see the Cholo Cherub here is wearing a fedora. In the background, you see the character holding the jetpack, and that's a representation of Campesino Man. So now you have Campesino Man and the Cholo Cherub in dialogue with one another in infancy, right? The image itself is inspired by that photo that you saw of myself and my cousin playing in the yard. The eyes floating in the sky, the planetscape that's kind of in the background with the eyes growing from the earth. Again, is all about me understanding what it is to navigate, what it is to see, what it is to reflect, and what it is to think spiritually, strategically, and think about myself in this larger space beyond myself, right? I think that's really what it becomes, is thinking beyond yourself. And so then I think about growth and the idea of growth as campesinos. And so this image was created to like reconceptualize what future looks like, right? We've got campesinos at the bottom of this painting, and I'll break it down a little bit. The campesinos at the bottom of the painting are working in their kind of traditional methods and structures of agriculture. And then they're growing these large giant plants, right? And the plants are growing these students, and these students are fighting. So like it's representation of our immigrant communities fighting for presence and space in this society, but it's also that like growth and future growth can be reimagined as one of like strength and power. And so then I start playing with that concept of the campesino, the farmer, growing vision, growing strength, growing consciousness. And then Campesino Man fully takes on this figurative representation of this is what this character looks like. And I'm painting it, right? And I was trained as a traditional painter, as an oil painter in college. And so I've been learning throughout this time, I've been learning portraiture and all this work. But this character of this very stylized Campesino Man character keeps coming back to me in this form. Maybe very much informed by the Mexican muralists like Diego Rivera, Orozco, Siqueiros, etc. Very rounded, very bold, very heavy in mass. But also his jetpack is always prominent. And again, in the stars, in the skies behind him are these strawberry images. So for me, that starts to reconceptualize what the role of and the power of the immigrant, the farm worker, the Latino, the Chicano, the community member, whoever they might be. There's this power because we are heart of cities, right? And so our power exists not just in the actual action of protest and expression of voice, but now we are the life of cities, right? We are the infrastructure of communities. We are the cogs and the wheels and all the components of a community. Like we're in it and we are part of it, right? And that includes like all the diasporic representations that exist within this kind of Latinx community. Campesino man then becomes more than just representation of self. In this image, you see protesters marching through a street, you see a flame, you see a little figure wearing a Superman outfit, t-shirt. That little figure is actually a picture of myself collaged into the painting. When I painted this, I had been working already in schools and I had seen the marginalization and the disparity that existed in these different environments. And I also saw the role that money played. And so I created this image as a way to show that we can fight against that disparity. So here you see literally Campesino Man kind of targeting this giant angel figure, but the angel figure is horned and has money for eyes. And so there's also this idea that there are community members, or there's educators who are driven to like educate for different purposes, and those are not always positive. Sometimes people take on this role for money, but sometimes people take on this role for power. And I've definitely seen education be used to try and erase identity, education to try and create conformity, and remove people's voice. And so a campesino man here is fighting to preserve that voice and fighting for the people that believe they belong in this community. The Cholo Cherub starts to definitely grow in representation. Like you'll see here that the blindfolds have, as he's coming down to try and collect this corn, right, which is the harvest, which is in and of itself metaphoric of everything, metaphoric of not just crops and agriculture, but of our future, of our children, etc. As the Cholo Cherub is coming down, you see this serpent figure in the background, and on his blindfold, you see the Virgin Mary. So again, there's this connection between personal awareness and reflection and consciousness and spirituality. Same character. I believe that serpent image takes on this identity of systems and institutions. And so here the Cholo Cherub is fighting that concept of systemic oppression and institutional marginalization. And then I start to develop these symbols of our own experiences, right? Like the paletero. And I start to transition those characters out of the kind of traditional everyday representations and into representations of hope and meaning. And not that they don't represent that on the day to day, but there's something about like changing the image on the ice cream cart to the fist and the eye, right? Which is power and consciousness. So now we're not just giving like the joy of the paleta, which in and of itself is powerful, but now this kind of spiritual figure is also sharing consciousness and power with community. I start to reimagine again the relationship between these characters like the bull and the child, and how they connect with each other and also how they exist in this environment. The strawberry, again, always present. In this image, I start to portray this child that doesn't have eyes, they do have eyes, but the eyes are, they don't have, right, like the pupil of the eye. They have whited out eyes, and they have flowers around their eyes. And so that becomes a representation of childhood and what children experience or see and that what they see is often, it's filled with, it's very complex, right? It's filled with trauma, right? So we go to a piñata party and everyone's at the celebration, and within that celebration, children are coming from homes where they have seen trauma and experienced trauma and been the victims of violence and abuse. And they also exist in spaces of celebration and dialogue with, like, between the two, right? And so there's this complexity to what children observe. There's this innocence and this filtering of all of these experiences through their lens. And so this image of a child with flowers on their eyes is the capacity for children to see the very complex nature of lived experience. As an educator, I start to think about, like, what is that, right? So I at one point I did this illustration because I was thinking about, what do my students, how do they connect with this concept? And I put within the eye of this child, on one side is the dollar sign, on the other side is time and money, right? And they're connected to these pipelines. And so the idea is that the children start to understand in this really intense way how they are part of a larger system. And then oftentimes I would see as an educator that they become driven by the same concepts that we have told them are important, which are time and money. And then that child starts to grow their own awareness and their own consciousness. So in this image, this celestial child is holding eyes over their hands. They have a fist on their shirt. They're understanding that they can see beyond what society is asking them to see. I start to play with the jaguar. The jaguar is an image that has roots for us in indigenous ancestry. And so, right, I start to think about the spots on the jaguar as not just spots, but vision. And so I start to change the image. But then I also start to think about the relationship between that jaguar and the child, and how the child then can assume in the different animals that are part of our ancestry, right? And the different spiritual and physical, like, powers that they have. Like, the child has the capacity then to embody those same attributes. And so there's, in this image, you see like chaos and burning behind this jaguar, with this child standing up directly in front of the jaguar, showing strength. And almost welcoming the jaguar, and the jaguar welcoming the child, to say, like, we can come together in this community. And so then I literally put them together by putting the jaguar on the child, right? So on one side, you see a child profile with the jaguar costume on, the jaguar helmet, jaguar uniform, kind of as a jaguar warrior. On the other side, you see the jaguar helmet. The illustration, the more digital illustration, that's actually a picture of, or a portrait of my daughter. Going back to the image of the bull and Amos, I've turned the bull now into this thing. Here, I'm playing with something interesting here, because I'm having the baby forming inside the bull, which is really pushing against, right, like, the idea of, like, conception. But also, like, for myself as a child, like, I was born out of this bull character that had such a prominent role in my life. This is a collage piece I did. It's a hummingbird, and the idea of, like, the hummingbird soldier fighting, right? We think about the hummingbird as, as this, like, kind of beautiful creature. It's majestic. It hovers, and oftentimes we see it through awe, but the hummingbird carries power. And here I'm turning it into more of, like, the soldier-like figure. Again, images of children, with books in their hands, images of children looking past barbed wire, looking past struggle, and looking into their strength. Here again, I have representations of children connected to these systems, these machines. There's ladders that represent like upward mobility. There's vision of the heavens. There's vision of community. There's the power of people in like the physical power of people. There's the instinctual, psychological vision that children have. There's the connectedness to earth. All of these figures represent one of those capacities. Through the center of it, you see barbed wire because it becomes the obstacle, right, of crossing barriers and boundaries. Here's another image. Here is a picture of, this is kind of, these are some sketches I just wanted to show y'all so you could see where this all came from. It looks like I have low battery, so I forgot to plug in my machine. And then here's our car. And I'm going to get through this quickly so that we can answer any questions. Again, you're gonna see a lot of the same images in the car that you saw throughout my presentation. But then there's something beautiful about all of these concepts around mobility and navigation being put on a vehicle, because we're literally navigating, like, and navigating San Antonio is a different experience, right? And I mean that in navigating the complexity of identity and culture that exists here, right? From first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth generation communities, some that are very aligned with their immigrant, indigenous, mestizo identities, to some that are very internally colonized community members who choose not to connect with those identities at all. I was actually really fearful of what it would be like to drive this car around San Antonio. I've had a really positive response, and I'm really thankful for that. But these are hard conversations to have in our community, and by putting this on a vehicle and driving it around town, I'm asking community members that maybe aren't ready to have this dialogue to think about something that could be really difficult for them. All of this is framed within the idea of like, what can our community do to create a stronger future for itself? And that's definitely where I think the alignment kind of culminates, right? Is that we're redefining futures for our communities. And that's the end of my presentation.
Okay, hold up, is it working yet?
Yep, I can hear you.
All right, can you guys hear me? I don't think it's quite coming through the mic yet, but it's gonna kick on here in a second, I know that much. For just now, while it figures that out, thank you, Ernesto, for sharing your artwork with us. Some quite striking pieces. Does anyone have any questions for Ernesto? Is it working yet? No? There it is. That's user error, actually. All right, our first question here.
Hello. I want to ask you specifically about the piece where Campesino Man fights the sort of capitalist, devilish angel figure.
Yes.
Does it, the figure, the angel figure, have anything to do with how Christianity and sort of the white supremacist construction of Christianity has been used to like oppress people throughout America and throughout the world at all? Did that inform any of your?
I'm sorry. Go ahead. Continue.
Did that inform any of your your piece at all?
100%. Right. I think one of the things that maybe I didn't talk about enough is, I mean, I grew up Catholic, right? And as I came to understand religion and spirituality, I started to understand the colonialist impact of religion in these different spaces. I've worked with youth since I graduated from college, but my first real teaching work happened when I was up in Minneapolis, right? In Minneapolis, a lot of the grassroots community movement work that happens there was by like religious communities, right? And so, absolutely, I believe that that piece was definitely informed by the role that Christianity has played in marginalizing communities. And what I don't want to do is I don't want to devalue the role that like spirituality has for community members, right? But I also very much am aware of the way that it was weaponized against communities.
Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for Ernesto? Yes, Dr. Dunkel.
Yes, two quick ones. When you were talking, I kept being reminded of a class we have in the Performance and Visual Studies program called Aesthetics of Activism. And I was wondering whether, how comfortable you might be with the label or tag of an activist. Do you consider your work activist in any way? The second one has to do with second question has to do with the earlier painting of the bull and the chicken with the internal organs sort of showing. Later on, you have when I saw it, I felt like the internal organs sort of also looked like a baby in a fetal position. And later on, when you had the bull with the baby in, it seemed to confirm that. But I just wanted to see whether you were making any such connections in those earlier pair of pictures of paintings.
Yes, thank you so much. Absolutely, to both of those, yes. I will proudly assume the title of artist, activist, educator. I believe that my work visually represents the experience I've had in communities of struggle. And I believe that for me, that doesn't exist the work doesn't exist without a statement of action or activism, right? Even driving that car around, the idea is that there's an activation of the viewer in a way that they might not be wholeheartedly comfortable. It's very unexpected. Viewers are going to stumble across it. They're going to look at an image and be like, that does not make sense to me. Why is there a baby in a fetal position in a bull that has wings on a car? And I think that having grown up with family members that were community organizers and watched students organize in protest and worked with grassroots organizations around the country, I believe that the voice of protest and action and activism are very much part of my identity. And the image of the baby in fetal position, I was definitely playing with that. I believe that I was born of those. I believe that I was born of those animals, right? Like the chicken. If I put myself inside a chicken or a rooster and the baby is in a fetal position, it's because that creature was fundamental and foundational in my nurturing of self. And the same thing with the fetal position in the bull, right? It's because that creature, both physically and spiritually, were fundamental and foundational in my development of identity.
Great. I think we have one more question, but I did have a quick follow-up. When I saw the infants, I immediately thought of some of Frida Kahlo's paintings. Was she on your mind at all?
She wasn't. You know what? Like, people have connected my work to Frida in the past, and I love that. I think that that's amazing. What's interesting is that I think stylistically, I align more with Diego Rivera, but conceptually, I do think I align more with Frida Kahlo. Or maybe it's a hybrid of the two conceptually, because definitely, right, Diego definitely worked, discussed like workers' rights and society and community and indigeneity, and Frida was representation of self, right? And so there was, maybe my work is connected to both.
Sure. Yeah, I just noticed the surrealism in Mexico City,
Yes.
where I discovered Lenora Keratin, and she has those eyes, and you have those eyes as well, so I was thinking of her too. But we have one more question here for sure.
Hi, yeah, I thought it was really fascinating. The Campesino man was not really a man. He looks like a little child too. And also, what does the flames, because I did notice the flames, and why the jet propulsion? Is that the only way it can get around?
I think that the jet propulsion, it's metaphoric. It's super not literal, right? The idea is, okay, literally this character can fly. It can get around, right? Like this. But it's super metaphoric in that, like, what the flames and the jetpack represent are being able to move into a space, being able to feel and see and intuit the space, learning the code in that space, figuring out how to then use that code in that space in a way that's healthy and can help you as the individual survive in that environment, because most of these spaces that we're walking into are spaces of conflict. And so it is a super simplified character, but the jet propulsion, the flames, and the jetpack are much deeper, right? Because it is,
Oh no!
I think we lost battery. Went out.
Oh, it
Yeah,
was,
he said his
he
battery.
did say it was dying.
Yes.
Well, let's, in his honor,